Try not to say it too big.
Good afternoon. I'd like to call this meeting of the Budget Committee to order. I'm the chair of this committee. My name is Lene Palmisano, and with me here today are council members Philippe Cunningham, Andrew Johnson, Lisa Goodman, Jeremiah Ellison, Jeremy Schrader, Steve Fletcher, and Kevin Reich. We do have a quorum of this committee, and we're authorized to conduct the business today. However, we have a new approach to budget this year, and it is the result of a multi-year effort that started with our coordinator's office and our audit department and involved many others and eventually all of the departments themselves. So I want to give great thanks and appreciation to Brian, to Andrea Larson, to Anna Kolsch, and to many, many others who have worked to try and get this together, and then every department head that's here today. This is really our next step of trying to integrate our performance with how we do budgeting here at the city. So on the agenda today are the first four departments that will be sharing their results and performance information. We will first have the city coordinator's office, then the health department, after that human resources, and finally IT. So I will start by turning it over to our city coordinator, Coordinator Rivera van Meyde. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. My name is Nuria Rivera van Meyde, and I should say at the outset that my folks are visiting from Puerto Rico and watching from home, so hola, mami, papi. I also said you'd be very nice to me, so. More importantly, we are here, and I'm really excited to be here. And as Chair Palmisano was saying, this is really the result of a lot of thought and a lot of effort. I recall coming to the city in 2013 and thinking about results and realizing that A, I could sort of pick my metrics, and I don't know how satisfying that is for community to see, but B, really realizing in reg services at that particular time that our metrics were aggregated, and so I set about and embarked on a journey to disaggregate our data, and that turned into ward reports and profiles that we use still to this day, and that really made me think a little bit about how transparent and how accountable we are, and had the opportunity in this new office and space to really partner with some bigger and better minds than my own to really think about results in a different way. So modeling that, we are here first. And last year we did our very first results reports. We had not, the coordinator's office had not done a results reports for a while, if at all. And so we really want to acknowledge the fact that there's a lot of thought process that went into this. I want to also say that I'm up here as the department head, but I by no means hold the knowledge in this department. Behind me and beside me are the people that I work with in the department. They are truly the subject matter experts of just about everything we do, and I could not do this work without the value and the expertise, the knowledge and the humor that they bring to the work each and every single day. So I want to just acknowledge our staff for that. And as we run through this report, I'll say that we, like other departments, will tell you that we're very, very unique and we're very special, and in that way we were all the same. And the purpose of these reports is to really try to standardize them a bit so that you and perhaps community that are inclined to look at this know what to expect from these results reports. In the past, they've been a mix. Sometimes they've been deeper dives, other times they've been sort of very high level, and I think that can be very confusing. This is an attempt, and we'll continue to adjust per your feedback as we move forward in the coming years, but really to think about what are those things that we hold ourselves accountable to. You will see in all the departments' reports some basic enterprise priorities. How are we doing on some values that you set out for us? Workforce diversity, and our spend diversity. And then you'll see some key department slides, and hopefully as we continue to become more mature in this effort, we'll start to see some indicators that really mark how we're doing on our progress so far. So with that, I'll really turn over to our department by itself, and you'll see, and this is one of those standard templates, our performance summary. What you'll note for us is that in that sense that we are not unique, that we will have departments look through their budget program areas and really think about what are those key indicators? This is not all the work that we do. This is not all the work that all departments do as they similarly show you their performance summary. But these are some of the key indicators that we're doing. What makes us a bit unique is that we haven't figured out quite yet what all our performance indicators, and I'll be very honest in saying that as we look for how do we, and particularly the coordinator's office that really serves to oftentimes accelerate work or incubate work or really manage and move forward some big policy-making priorities until that shifts off to someone else. How do you continue to have a work plan? And you'll note that that's one of our priorities for this year as we have reorganized our internal office as well to really respond to that. You'll see some gray indicators on the right-hand side when we think about strategic management and administration, and the innovation team is now taking on this results work. They did not have, as compared to last year, and that's how we do these performance metrics, a 2017 to a 2018. We did not have metrics for that, and so those are indicated in gray as no trend. And for the rest, as we think about what that looks like, there's a legend up top. So for example, if we look at sustainability and we look at our farmers markets metrics, you'll see under 2B, a red mark denoting that we decreased by more than 5%. I say that openly to say that decrease is not necessarily a bad thing. We have seen a decrease in our farmers market vendors, but it's because we have wanted to increase the amount of dollars spent and the diversity of our farmers market vendors so that perhaps reducing duplication of the same types of products going on. So in those cases, as you continue to receive our report and others, I really welcome you to think about what do those red markers indicate or not.
If I may just pause you there, I think a little bit more orientation up here on the dais might be helpful. In the spirals in front of you, there is this document that Ms. Rivera van der Meyde is going through right now that is the tab that says CC report. There is also for each of these results reports, the second tab that is more of like a one-pager. It's almost always a one-pager. It says analysis, and this analysis is provided by the coordinator's office, and then that department head has worked with their home committee chair to pick out the focus areas, and that's what they've chosen to do a deeper dive on. Questions can be on anything. I do have speaker management open, and I will also look for people's flags and ask Vice Chair Fletcher here with me to also just help us keep track of questions. But if, with your permission, we could ask questions dynamically as they come up, kind of when you're at the end of a slide type of thing, and we'll just handle it that way unless you wish for anything different. So, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So as we look at the performance summary, this is really just a mark of indicators. I'm going to go into some more depth on each of one of these, but for each department, we will have worked with you. We will continue to work for you in the future. As we hear from community as well, we will take in the future feedback on what that looks like. What is it that you really want to see and what's important? Because there's a lot of work that goes on in the background, but it may not be the critical or what people are wanting to learn a little bit more about. But as you can see, we have, and we're going by budget program area, so this may change as departments change their budget program areas in the future, and there's been a lot of effort. I got to thank Micah Intramill and his team. There's been a lot of work trying to clean out program areas. Similarly, finance with HR have also been trying to clean out things like vacancies and what does that look like, so that we really kind of get to accountability on where those monies and our resources are spent. You'll see that that's how we report. In most of these report summaries, too, they're in order of program, the amount of budget. So there's no particular order to them other than we've aligned them to how many resources they are, and that's why you see that order there. This slide, the enterprise priority slide, I'll say that you'll see for every department moving forward, and I'll say that we're extraordinarily proud to see these numbers. This, for us, represents a lot of work. On the one hand, I'll say that the workforce diversity is something that HR took on a few years ago to really think about what does it take to reach our diversity numbers? How do we make sure that the city enterprise workforce reflects our community? And they set about studying that. They hired a consultant, and for each department really met with them individually to say, what can you do to bring those numbers forward? And I'm happy to see the numbers that we have in terms of our goal, that we certainly meet those enterprise goals. I believe they were set for 2020. Is that correct? Patience? 2022. And happy to say that we have met those already as we move forward. But this is something that will keep us accountable. Again, not meeting them doesn't mean that a department has done something wrong. It could be that they have difficulty recruiting, or it could be that they haven't just thought of it and seen the breakdown in that way and are now taking other steps. So for us, breaking down the data this way was really helpful by department. And then perhaps for me, the one I've been most involved with in the past has been the Spend Diversity Dashboard. This started with a 2015 council direction by Councilmember Glidden and Councilmember Quincy, who asked the coordinator's office to partner with finance and civil rights and CPED and the city attorney's office and really think about our spend diversity efforts. And in that, some very talented folks did a lot of time. It took us about 18 months to clean that data up, and we were able to get to a dashboard that really spoke to spend in the city. A previous CFO had told me we'd never get it done. I'm happy to say that we did, but it took a lot of heavy lifting to do that. And as we are able to do that, then each department then can see how they are spending with diversity. This led to the Now Target Market program and continues to make us be accountable to how much we spend those dollars. So really excited to see this here. As we continue to add more enterprise metrics, and I'll advance that I'd love in the future to see whether those are equity metrics or whether those are sustainability metrics for the enterprise, that we can incorporate that, because each department has a role to play in those goals that we've set for ourselves in the city.
Thank you. Councilmember Cunningham, you have a question or comment?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, City Coordinator Vandermine. I just wanted to ask, within the spending with diverse suppliers, do we count that just with for-profits, or is it for-profits and nonprofits, or are we not including nonprofits?
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Cunningham, at this moment we are only counting for-profit entities. The next phase of this program, and we've been thinking about how do we account for nonprofit. Part of the reason for nonprofit is they don't always have a choice in how, or we don't always have a selection. We're partnering with an organization and how they've chosen to comprise themselves, or who that head of that organization is. It may be a valuable organization, but we don't have a say in who their head is, just by the nature of their being a 501c3. But we still want to try to get to those dollars. In particular, we have several of our departments. Health is one of them, CPED is another, and figuring out how do we account for those dollars. We should know what it is, even though we may not have control over selecting one vendor over another, because we want to partner with a particular organization.
Mm-hmm. So you said the next phase, when is that?
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Cunningham, so that's currently ongoing. The Supplier Diversity Group continues to meet. As I have switched positions, I have now asked one of the deputy directors, Danielle Shelton-Wajak, to take that over. And that is, I don't have the work plan in front of me, but I can get that to you. But I know that that is something that we've anticipated, because we'd like to add that to our website in the next, whenever we next update that. And I imagine it'll be, whether it's on this year's work plan or the following year, but I know that it is on the horizon.
Okay, great. Yeah, I just want to make sure that I'd like to see that prioritized, because of the fact that I know within at least the health department, the work that I've done, I just know that they do so much work spending with nonprofits. And so I want to make sure that we're not overlooking that as well. And when we talk about diversity, are we talking about geographic diversity at all, or are we just focusing on women and people of color?
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Cunningham, right now we're just focusing on women and people of color, as per whether they're MBEs or WPAs. Or WBEs. With the Target Market program, we're trying to figure out better analytics, but part of those is they have to be in the sort of 13 metro county area, and so that has more geography. With that one, because we require a geographical component, we're able to get to zip code information, and we'll be better able to know and perhaps in the future redefine what local is. Maybe it's not those 13 metro counties. Maybe it then starts to become more regional. So that is something that the work group will also be thinking about as well.
Great. Madam Chair, if I may, just one last observation. I would just say that while we can't control who is leading nonprofits, they are based in certain parts of the city, so that might be a good tracking metric to be able to because if folks are going out of their way to work with Northside nonprofits, for example, leaders may come and go, but that organization is still serving the community. So just wanted to bring that to attention. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Cunningham, if I may just add one thing, that when we think about, for example, I think of our geography-placed, our place-based strategies, this may be something that we think about, whether it's the promise zone that you hear a little about today or the green zones work, that it may be that we come with recommendations that really truly prioritize that. That was one of, if you indulge me in the pun, that was one of the promises of the promise zone, that we really focus in on that area. And so that's another direction, another area that we can really think about where those businesses are and who we're contracting with in a different way. I won't spend a lot of time on these department priorities, only because this is the first time you're seeing this template to really kind of reference it, but say that each department will generally have the option to include department priorities. This is not obviously the only work that we do, and you'll hear a little bit about some of the work, but this is kind of what we needed to do to move forward. And this year, or past year, I guess if we're reporting on 2018, a lot of that was organizationally. As our previous city coordinator left and I stepped into that role, we have 2 new deputies, and we really started to think about how do we measure and make sure that we add value to the organization. So we spent a lot of time really thinking about looking at the time and the work that comes our way and thinking about how to do things better. Examples of that include what we're doing right here today, which is bringing results to a different format. But as you'll hear a little bit, there's also, this includes things like changing how we do our strategic planning, and then this year that included racial equity as a key component to that. So getting to a little bit more of the meat of how we divide our work, we really are split into 2 main areas. Strategic management really focuses more on internal or enterprise-facing work, and strategic initiatives, which as we think about is really more focused on work that looks externally or partners more externally than others. This strategic management and administration and I-team slide really talks a little bit about those initiatives. And we worked a lot this year to develop better accountability mechanisms. Last year, as this new council body came aboard, we did 7 study sessions that really helped us onboard council members in preparation for new policy initiatives. We partnered with finance to link results and budget, and some of that you're seeing here as we really come to move results to a more public-facing forum and creating standard reports templates that still allow for unique content, which I know is something that departments really strive for, but allow it to be done in a way that is easy to read and easy to follow for particularly our community as we move forward. We formalized our partnership with the U and helped bring forward the baseline report for minimum wage. And there's a lot of policy work that goes in that as we move forward. And the innovation team last year was successful in helping to launch with CPED and our other partners, Reg Services and Health, launching the business portal, and they partnered with policymakers and Reg Services and the City Attorney's Office to add clarity and improve our work on conduct on premise, and I know really in conjunction and partnership with Councilmember Cunningham and others. We brought forward performance management, and as we changed, and I have to say that I'll publicly ask for forgiveness and acknowledge the grace with which departments stayed with us as we change results again. This is more, I'd say, art than science. We partnered with What Works Cities. We looked to other cities. We really thought to come up with a results reporting mechanism that fits our needs, and in that, it changed from year to year. And so I really appreciate the fact that our department heads and those that really work on this in those departments stayed with us as we did that. You'll see here that we note that we did 71% of our departments completed results management reports. In actuality, it was all department except for 4 that we exempted, specifically because they had other mechanisms or we were bringing them on to the new reporting structure. And then previously, the clerk's office and audit generally have not done this. And this year, you will see their results reports moving forward. And so I'm very pleased with the amount of folks that took the time to change a new format and work with us. Our enterprise team, too, does a lot of those enterprise organizations. So there is an IT governance group. We support ELMS. Our team has been working on the new public service center. We also host or staff the permanent review committee and do a variety of things across the enterprise that really speak to our partnership. So our strategic management group is always and ever busy. I'll move a little bit to some of the programs in our strategic initiative keys, and I'll say that this goes to the heart of some of our key values. Race and Equity spent a lot of time with our results and finance teams to create a strategic and racial equity plan that will help prioritize our work and create metrics that will hold us accountable on whether we've actually achieved our goals. Sustainability has been extremely busy partnering with enterprise staff and community to move our collective climate and food policy goals forward. Arts, culture, and the creative economy recruited 5 artists for city projects, Census, Green Zones, and Greenway. They partnered with Northern Spark and placed 48 artist projects in the Commons for the festival, in addition to the Carry On Homes piece that was a centerpiece of that work. And they finished the 2018 Creative Index. And despite the current administration and the decline of dollars coming out of our federal administration and federal partners, the Promise Zone continued to convene Northside partners and spent the bulk of last year focused primarily on economic development, with an economic development working group that's made up of city staff from CPAD, obviously the coordinator's office, the Small Business Administration, Federal Reserve Bank, community-based organizations, small Northside businesses, as well as folks from Councilmember Ellison's team and Councilmember Ellison himself. And this year we expect some similar great work that we'll be able to report out next year on our resilience and our human trafficking work that have just started in our office. To some of those, I'll go in a little bit more detail because we've got a little bit more information about them and sustainability. And we have in Kim Havey, a great sustainability manager who's been really leading exceptional staff who, even before he got here, were doing great work. And I think Kim has been a tremendous addition to the city as we move forward. And you'll see that sustainability really drives the work of the city both internal policy making and now with the boards and commissions, or in addition to the boards and commissions that they staff as well, that they really move some of these internal and external sustainability policies forward. The program has a particular emphasis on homegrown Minneapolis initiatives, climate and energy strategies, as well as wastewater and tree canopy improvements. But some of these measures, and I know that many of you are, if not all of you, are quite familiar with these measures, but we really took a moment to highlight the Minneapolis greenhouse gas emissions from citywide activities, and we wanted to also highlight the great work that Tamara does on farmers market metrics. But as you can see, we have and you know this better than I, as you've passed resolutions to this effect, we have ambitious energy goals. We want to continue to meet our climate action goals of reducing gas emissions by 30% by 2025. And I'll say that that is a pretty aggressive goal. Some of the recent actions you've taken, the resolution to get our city into 100% renewable, I think will help us, but there are some stubborn areas that we need to continue to work with staff across the enterprise to focus on what that looks like. And in particular, I'll note that staff informs me, because this is where they are much more versed and better versed than I am, but on-road transportation and natural gas consumption are two of those main areas that staff really will be heading into and digging into to see what we can do on that. But by and large, one of the things I benefit, and I hope that the city sees the benefit of sustainability, is that A, they don't tend to work in isolation. They work across the enterprise. They partner with health, they partner with property services and finance, they partner with public works, they partner with the convention center. We are now convening a cross-department staff group to really think about what that looks like and have staff be able to make sure that we all know what's going on and, very importantly, be able to champion sustainability efforts across the city. So I really appreciate Kim's leadership in this and the rest of the sustainability staff, as well as highlight all the other people in the enterprise that do great work on sustainability that don't happen to live in our department.
Thank you. I want to point out, and maybe just get in the habit of doing this, as your home committee chair and enterprise committee, this is one of the focus areas that we chose for this discussion, was about greenhouse gas emissions. So I think now is maybe an appropriate time to ask you, is the city on track to meet its 2025 reduction target? That would be 30% per year. Per your slide here. Your thoughts on that?
Chair Palmisano, so as you can see, we have a report in front of you that really speaks to 2016 reporting, and we should have data through 2018 sometime later this year, and so we'll see how we're doing. Staff thinks that they are relatively optimistic. I believe the term was medium confidence, Kim. And I'll say that in some of the, part of that is seeing a decline in what we're doing with electricity consumption. But I believe that as we continue to move forward, particularly in some of the steps that you've taken in conjunction with staff to really move things like the decision to be 100% renewable by 2022, those are the kinds of actions that will maintain us getting on track. I will say, however, that to the other points of this on-road transportation and this natural gas consumption, that we're going to actually have to really be thoughtful about how to dig into those, because at some point we will have the return on investment in what we're doing with renewable. If we achieve that in 2022, then we'll have pretty much set out and met that goal, but we will not perhaps have finished everything else that we need to do. There's a report that sustainability puts out that is the index for this greenhouse gas emission work that if you look at that, it will say that if we actually did the 100% renewable electricity goals and we met them for 2016 when this was reported, we will have reduced our greenhouse gas emission. We would be about 49% below the baseline. So it's possible. I think we're on track, but there's more to be done. And with those, I think sustainability, we're partnering with you and with departments across the enterprise to figure out how do we continue to do that.
Thank you. Councilmember Schrader.
Thank you. I just first want to thank you and the department for the amazing work you do. It's really a joy to work with the Office of Sustainability. To your comment about how we have ambitious goals for 2030, I mean, the unfortunate truth we learn every day is that that's not enough. So I look forward to working with the office more to get that. I do have two questions on the farmers markets. The reduction, over 100 of them, I think first to seek a better product mix. My question is why? You know, that makes sense in the fall when there's a lot in season, but in the next couple of weeks, everybody's going to be selling rhubarb. So it's just a matter of like, why was that a positive thing if that's a reduction in costs or other things? And then the second one, how were those picked? You know, if you're just accepting certain vendors that they have to meet new criteria, what other kind of factors were thought about?
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Schrader, thanks for the question. And I think this is about being intentional about space. I mean, and the reality too is that there are so many stalls and there's so many vendors, and we want to make sure that we are providing as much support as we can for the broader variety of folks. And while we don't need 80 stalls that have rhubarb, are there other products? Because in season means a broader variety of products. And I think that people are thinking about that. we're choosing to spend most of our time working on increasing the number of customers and the amount of money that each customer brings, because frankly, this is an economic driver, and we want to make sure that whatever's coming to the folks that we're supporting, many of them are people of color and are business entrepreneurs of color, that they're able to benefit from that economic drive. And also trying to increase the number of vendors who are participating in the current metrics project, because we think we'll get better data that will then sort of let us know how do we shift and how do we support other people as that moves forward. So we certainly are by no measure trying to dissuade folks from coming in, but we're really being thoughtful about where we put our efforts. If we think about our farmers markets and that staff resource, that really has been traditionally a staff 01, along with at different times interns moving forward. And so I think you're going to see with the metrics and what comes out of that are those specific criteria about how do we support, where do we move forward, is it location, is it size, is it product, is it business administration, and I think that's going to be a useful study.
Thank you.
We turn to arts, culture, and the creative economy, and I think I mentioned that they had that busy year. And again, I say they, but it really traditionally has been one person. A lot of our impact or our efforts in the city has been a person 01. This year, with the grant from Kresge, we are able to expand that and have welcomed some additional great creative thinkers into our sphere. And so part of those highlights, and obviously the arts, culture, and the creative economy partner with CPED and Mary Altman in terms of what happens there with art in public spaces. But our office really helps not only do what we did with Northern Spark, but thinks about, and that's in the Creative City Challenge, thinks about creative city making and really focused on placing artists, and with a particular emphasis on artists of color, in different projects in the city. They are also currently partnering with CPED in a new ACE-TAP program through monies that we got last year to be thoughtful about how do we provide resources that are meaningful. And by that I mean not just spaces and find this is where you can lease or this is how you can get financing gaps, but really figuring out what do artists in our community need and how do we move that forward. And I'll say that in recent times, I know that you're no stranger to this reality, but we have heard a lot about the struggles of our small and medium arts organizations across the city. And our arts, culture, and the creative economy folks have brought forward recommendations about what we can do as a city enterprise in helping and assisting something that is so vital. Arts brings such vitality to any city, and Minneapolis is known for its art scene. And so we are trying to find ways that we can support artists in very, very different ways, and in ways that really are sustainable, particularly for those nonprofits organizations that are perhaps struggling with not the finances or perhaps not the artists, but with either leases or with board management and administrative management.
If I may, sorry.
Not at all.
If I may, Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nuri won't be surprised to hear me speaking on this topic. I think the problem we have now is that what the program description for arts and the creative economy is not what we need. And so there's just a difference in opinion about what arts and the creative economy should be. From where I sit, arts is economic development. And as a result of that, small arts organizations failing is something we urgently need to get involved in. And that is the economic development angle of it. When Soap Factory or Intermedia Arts or now Heart of the Beast have to lay off half of their staff, they have systemic problems that could be helped by something like BTAB. I actually think we should have a small business team person just focused on small arts organizations because they are economic development. And when you look at the performance measurements, none of this is really measurable. And I think that's the problem. I don't see, like in the BTAB summary that we got from Daniel Bonilla, you see who was helped, what ward they were in, how it meets our race equity goals. There are specifics. And I look at this summary of the performance measurements, and if you asked any of these organizations that are failing how they felt about some of these things or did these things help them, they would say no. So I've tried, as you know, for years to urge us to move in the direction of arts as economic development, house this position at the PED, work with the small business team and BTAB in order to help small arts organizations. I'm just wondering how many more of these small organizations will fail before we'll realize that we're spending $1 million to study things and put out reports about arts as a creative index. We know we have a creative community. We're at a point now where our arts organizations as small businesses really need hands-on help. And in some cases, it might mean funding or leveraging funding with others. And our program, as the program description describes, is not really doing that. It's doing something else. And that might have been something else we needed at the time, but it doesn't seem to be the thing we need now. So what are your thoughts about rethinking how we do this work? Or is it something you're going to suggest we put forward in the budget? Because I'm happy to make a suggestion about a dramatic change in this within the budget process, but since we've discussed this, you might have some thoughts on how you see us moving towards that position of actually helping these smaller arts organizations. The Guthrie doesn't really need our help. I would probably say Heart of the Beast at this point does. It breaks your heart to hear them do a public radio story talking about a storied institution unable to raise a very small amount of money in order to keep the parade going.
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Goodman, I am not surprised to hear you ask me that question, obviously. We have talked about it before, and I'll say a couple things about it. I think you're right that in the past, the arts, culture, and the creative economy, it serves the purpose that that fits it at the moment. And as somebody, for example, for whom Creative City Making was a partner in Reg Services when I was there, that was an exciting program to bring internally and to really retrain and reorient our inspectors to think about things differently. As we move forward now, I concur with your point of view that I think arts is an economic driver, and what we've done, both with the Creative City Index, but also really thinking in this place that we find ourselves in with, to your point, folks like the Soap Factory or Heart of the Beast, or even thinking about what the needs of Art-A-Whirl are. Those are iconic kind of events that move forward in the city that we have to rethink what we're doing and what our response to that is. And that includes, I'm never above rethinking about what we do in our office and reorienting to what we do. I don't want to minimize, however, some of the real life people and the artists that were here. When I look at 120 artists or 48 artists placed in something that gives them such attention in the Northern Spark, or 120 artists who receive direct program assistance, I don't want to negate that because that's really impactful. But to your point, Councilmember Goodman, I think that it also behooves us to really think about what do we stand for as a city in terms of these iconic events. These make our city alive. And we do have some recommendations that we hope to move forward. I will say, however, that we will be looking to your guidance because arts organizations are like other perhaps struggling organizations. And when we open doors like, do we waive fees, or do we support financially in other ways, or do we perhaps try to figure out what other grant opportunities and do a different kind of loan program for artist organizations? There's been a variety of these because we've also involved CPED in that conversation. We want to make sure that we can tailor and we can discuss with you recommendations that are really specific to the creative needs of our city. That's one of the reasons that we've been partnering to do this arts network fair, and we hope to have that in the next few months, because that's that invitation for artists and art organizations to tell us exactly what is it that we need. Because when we've asked them, and we have asked them, we have called and we have said, what is it that you're struggling with? It is all across the board. It is some that are in a building that just is not suited for their needs, that requires a lot of restoration or renovation that they cannot afford. For others, it has been a changing amount of executive directors or their board staff. For others, it is just that the profits that they're seeing or that the people that are coming to their event, that is dwindling. For many, and we've seen this in the press, are philanthropic and our business organizations are shifting their dollars elsewhere. So we now need to step in very different ways. But I absolutely agree with you that this is a position that has been looking and will continue to look at these policies in a very different way because it must be tied to economic development.
Madam Chair, Nuria, I had a donor who was willing to give the city a building at the same time that an arts organization on Lake Street was losing its building. We didn't have any help out of this division. We had to call on CPED, who had to hire a consultant because they didn't have anyone working on arts as economic development to work with us to determine whether or not this building couldn't be a potential home. And in the time that it took for the city to get its act together, the owner of the building said, forget it, I'm not going to wait that long, and put someone else in the building. We need someone who is not just reactive, but not someone. It's not about the people. It's about what the focus of this is. And, you know, I mean, you look at, I talk about money. I mean, do we really need to have this like art event in the Commons, the wealthiest part of town that has no problem with tons of arts organizations, and we put like a lot of money into having an art exhibit at the Commons? I mean, if we're going to have an art exhibit, why wouldn't we have it at the place of, you know, West Broadway or East Franklin or East Lake Street? Well, because the money comes from the convention center, so it can only be spent in this certain area. I mean, I would argue that the creative city making challenge thing is just money looking for a way to be spent rather than kind of focusing on it. I don't think Northern Spark needs all that much help from us. I mean, my goodness, one person pulled together Open Doors Minneapolis and didn't get very much help from the city, certainly not the department, if anything, the mayor's office. So there's a disconnect between what's happening and research and the importance of research. We need to focus on dealing with real people on the ground right now. And I look at 2 or 3 of my colleagues are artists. And, you know, I don't know what they think, but I would say that creating an index about the creative economy and the cost of that versus helping Heart of the Beast raise money to put on a parade, it would be an easy call. We need to make a serious change in this area. I've said this before. I have said it privately. I'm saying it publicly. I'm hoping with this new group of council members, this is the time for change.
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Goodman, as always, I welcome your insight, and I'm actually really excited to hear your thoughts on Creative City Challenge, because it is something that I have just recently discussed in the mayor's office as well, that this is something that perhaps in the past, and this is a conversation that we've obviously had with staff and Gagoon in particular, we've tied this to Northern Spark, but we don't need to. We really think that this work can be tied in the future to the work that we're doing with cultural districts. And precisely, we can move this around. This can be something that we move elsewhere in the city. It does not have to be any more tied to the Commons or downtown. This money that comes from the budget no longer comes from the convention center. This is actually a budgetary request that we do directly, and as such, we are no longer tied to it. And it is time, as you say, to start moving this in a different direction. So,
Council Vice President Jenkins has a question or comment.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano and Ms. Rivera. Rivera. I wholeheartedly agree with Councilmember Goodman. I have no disagreement. Only I would add that it doesn't have to be either or. It certainly can be both and you know, I've been talking about restructuring the way we are thinking about art in the city and really taking steps and actions on that, and really thinking about how do we consolidate all of the funding that we are spending on the arts, including the arts funding that is in Public Works Department, and as well as CPED, and how do we bring all of those things together as arts as a tool for economic development. And I'm glad you mentioned the cultural districts, which I was going to bring up as one way to really think about how we're supporting these really, as has been noted, I think integral identity and branding for the city of Minneapolis, and arts events, arts activities. And so I've been working with Councilmember Wright, Councilmember Ellison, as well as Councilmember Cano, and looking at these small to medium arts organizations, and then combining that work with cultural districts and how we can come up with a better strategy. So I just wanted to comment, Councilmember Goodman, I'm very much in agreement with you. I'm very much looking forward to having you and other colleagues join us in thinking about this really important topic as a way to I think, help address what we have identified as priorities in the city, and economic inclusion is certainly one of them. And the arts and small to medium art-sized organizations are lifting our economy, is a very strong part of our economy in Minneapolis, and we need to be involved in supporting that. So very much looking forward to trying to create a new structure for how we address arts in our community.
Thank you. I wanted to point out that this is a really important time to begin to state and voice some changing needs. We have a full complement. Thank you, everybody else who's joined us here. We have a full complement of city council here, and while that might seem uncomfortable as a start, it's really open and honest. And to me, this is exactly why we want to start having these conversations before any budget gets put together, because it helps council state some of our changing needs and changing priorities. We have 2 other council members in queue, and I just want to do a time check that we do want to wrap up in the next 10 minutes with this department so we can move on. We have Councilmember Fletcher and then Councilmember Ellison.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. I am sort of reflecting on thinking about what we want out of results, and I think we really want to be measuring impact. And I think I am a little frustrated by the lack of measurable impact in this arts sector. And I think that particularly, it would be really good if we could have a little clearer analysis. There's sort of 2 things that happen within the creative economy. Some of it is that it generates a lot of economic activity, and some of it is that it generates a lot of joy that doesn't necessarily generate economic activity, and that is going to get pushed out and crushed as the general economic pressure on every piece of real estate everywhere in the city goes up and up and up. And so at times, I think we have to be clearer about if rents are going up, if retail rents are going up, if property taxes are going up, if all of these upward pressures are happening on spaces. We need to know what in the arts economy is hanging on by a thread, so that we know what's going to be in trouble next year, so that we can get ahead of that a little bit. And I feel like somehow what I'd love to see is a lot more coordination with economic development, is a lot more coordination with the folks who are thinking about real estate values, with the folks who are thinking about what kind of economic activity are we generating, so that we can start to get a sense of how do we get ahead of this. Because I am disappointed by the number of institutions that are struggling that I heard about when they called my office directly, and that it didn't feel like we were ahead of, and it didn't feel like we had a handle on. And I think we need to be thinking about the ways that our whole city's economy is shifting, and the ways that that's going to support some parts of the creative economy and absolutely crush some parts of the creative economy that we might really want to hold on to because they're part of what makes our city special. So I am really hoping that we can show an impact both in things that we preserve, and then in things that we're able to help flourish, that are a fit for the direction that the economy is going.
Councilmember Ellison.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to say that I think a lot of this is about context. There may have been I know that as an artist who had to earn an income from his art before I ran for office, I definitely want to see the arts become a part of how we consider economic development. I also know that in a certain context, there's a time where it felt like as a city, we were just trying to prove that art was worthwhile, right? And that art did contribute to the economy. I don't know that a lot of people necessarily knew that. And the context has changed, and there are different, and there's, again, 3 artists on the council. And so I think the focus is probably going to change, and we've kind of started those conversations. And so I just wanted to say, while I think that that Councilmember Goodman's absolutely right. We have to figure out how we're integrating this into economic development. I also just wanted to point out that, again, the context is changing. Who's on the council is changing. And again, we do have to support these these organizations that are struggling to stay afloat. But things like creative city making, maybe it's a matter of us figuring out how do we pinpoint the exact outcomes better, right? I was a creative city making artist before I ran for office. Now I'm in office. I think in no small part due to some of the knowledge that I gained during creative city making, you could consider that an outcome, right? And so sort of mapping out how do we articulate our outcomes when it comes to this program, and then how do we evolve it as the context changes, I think is something that I just wanted to note.
Chair Palmisano, I'll note two things. One, my mother's a stained glass artist, and as she's watching, she'll be really excited to see that we're having, as a city, a conversation about arts and how centered that is. So just a nod to that background as well. But say that I think we agree and we stand ready to work with you. I mean, I think you're right. The policy we are changing and evolving. But I also think that we're thinking about this as sort of pathways. I think of the Creative City Challenge as kind of a pathway program, if you will, that it allows young artists, and in particular artists of color who have come to this Creative City Challenge, to start with a smaller area, and they've been able to leverage that further. So I think you're right, Councilmember Ellison, that those types of programs, Creative City Making or Creative City Challenge, there's something to preserve there. But you're also right, as we talk about the conversations that Councilmember Fletcher and Councilmember Goodman and others are bringing forward, that this is an economic driver. We see that in the Creative City Index. We see that the creative sector is growing exponentially, and we want to make sure that we're partnering with those people, particularly in the enterprise like CPED, who will help us drive that forward. So we take that note, and we will continue to show outcomes and impact in increased ways as the shift progresses.
Thank you. Councilmember Reich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not to expand on an already well expanded on point and topic, it's not just a matter, I think, of even shifting it more into economic development, because even that has proven to be very limited when we've gotten more niche. I'll use an example. 3 or 4 years ago, we said we'd be more tailored to cooperatives. And that barely even has a line item in that budget. So we're still stuck in the old tool with a kind of nod to some tailoring in a small portfolio fashion with one FTE. So I would say that there's no panacea by that shift. And even so, then it would still be a reactive thing to more dominant market forces and this is my big addition, land use. And so as we look forward for our comp plan and the things that we want to achieve within that, and then insert the values that we've been describing through the arts and creative economy, we have to think about the massive impact that our land use choices, sometimes conflicting with other values we have, will make moving forward. And I think that will be almost as much of a make or break on the state of our artistic endeavors in the city and the people that support them as anything else. And it certainly would be a proactive gesture, not a reactive one, if we do it right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We really need to wrap up the coordinator's office and move on to others. And I know we wanted to have a fulsome discussion about the Promise Zone, so I'll just hand that challenge to you.
I will not do justice then to the last two slides, but as we think about the race and equity work, perhaps there is not a lot to say about enterprise equity other than you'll see on that slide all the many, many different ways in which race and equity has started to embed itself. And when I think of that, I don't just think of the race and equity that has been embedded throughout departments, but that is also where our recast comes forward, as we have really focused on healing and trauma and partnering with such great partners such as health on that issue. But I'll lift up a little bit that this group and this division was instrumental in really reshaping our strategic process. And for all of you who went through the strategic and racial equity action planning, the results of that will be some prioritization and some metrics that will really tell us if we've achieved it in ways that are beyond just words, but that will really let us measure whether or not we are making progress on those values that we have said about bridging and reducing the inequities that exist across our city.
One more thing from Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. I know you want to move on, but I just want to acknowledge and highlight all the work that has gone into what I think is really an historic and groundbreaking achievement for us And we still have a lot of work to do in order to realize positive outcomes. But the fact that we have embedded a race equity lens and theory into all of our strategic planning and processes is a huge accomplishment. So thank you to you and all the staff that really worked to bring that forward, Ms. Joy Mar-Stevens, Ms. Andrea Larson, and all others who have been really deeply engaged in bringing that work forward. I know Brian Smith has been a part of those conversations, as staff in the council president's office, all of my colleagues. It is really incredible achievement to get to this level. And this work has been going on since 2014. And so we should all feel really proud. We have to keep our proverbial foot to the pedal and keep this work going, keep it relevant, keep it front of mind. And so to that end, we will be hearing some updates in the very near future about some of the progress that has been made. But I just wanted to highlight that and note that during this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Councilmember Goodman and then Cunningham.
Sorry. Madam Chair, Nuri, I just wanted to take a moment just to note that over the weekend I received the Recast annual report, and I had an opportunity to read it, and I was so impressed with it that I asked my office to set up a Lunch with Lisa meeting on that topic. Why was I so impressed with it? Because it was very specific about outcomes, and the numbers are huge. Thousands of people trained, 150 some odd mental health professionals trained, and lots of people who received this trauma-enforced training. I had no idea that this was going on at this level. I had participated in the survey surrounding the participatory budgeting portion, and I was really impressed just as a citizen trying to figure that out. But when I read the annual report, I really think it's something that has so many good performance measures met with real numbers that people who don't follow this issue would really be impressed with the work that's going on. I was, and I would urge folks to get a chance to read this Recast summary. It's extremely impressive. Normally, I don't want to even see anything in paper. I brought it back to the city from at home and just showed everyone in my office what incredible work is going on that we really don't know a lot about in our office. And so if we don't, we need to work harder to get the word out to other people. So kudos to the team that put that out and did all that work. I just think it's incredible.
That's a great comment. Councilmember Cunningham.
I'll make it brief. Thank you, Madam Chair. I know that we can take it for granted since Council Vice President Jenkins and I are on the council, but the fact that we have a specific category for transgender equity is a really big deal. So I just wanted to name that. That is not common in other cities, and I want to say thank you to city staff for keeping the work alive, for carrying it forward. Where Council Vice President Jenkins and I once were staff carrying it, now it has been passed on, so thank you to the folks who have kept it alive. I know we can glide past it because it's like, cool, we did that, and but I just wanted to take a moment to say that's a big deal, and thank you for keeping it alive.
Chair Palmisano and all council members, I'll say on behalf of everyone, thank you, but really, truly, you've mentioned some folks, but in particular, Joy and her team have really led the race equity work and working with Recast in conjunction and collaboration with other partners, but Joy's leadership has been extraordinary. You'll see just a slice of that on the equity and inclusion slide. And while I can't speak highly enough about our staff, I have to say that this lift to incorporate SREAP into how we breathe at city enterprise and how we think about our planning and our budgeting process would not have been possible were it not for the partnership and agreement by council and so in the mayor's office. So the policy makers who really brought this forward, I can't thank you enough for making this a priority that holds us accountable to moving this work forward. So I'm glad that report, as so many other things that we do sometimes go, it's just stuff that we do in the background, and I'm so pleased that people are reading it and finding it useful. So we will do our best to market it better, more, louder.
Thank you, Ms. Rivera Vandermeide. I want to point out that as this may happen, we're not going to be able to get to the Promise Zone questions and thoughts for today, but I think the right way to handle it then is to take it back to a very near future enterprise meeting, since that's your home committee, and I promise to do that, and we can have that conversation, particularly around what the city's role is for grant money when the grant money goes away. I think that's a really important topic. I'll invite all of you to join me for that, and it'll be kind of a continuation of the results meeting. Unfortunately, council members only had this on our calendars for 2 hours of time, and I think to maintain great interest in this, we're going to keep it to 2 hours today. So,
Chair Palmisano, if I may, in closing, and I won't go to this slide, but I want to acknowledge the fact that our Promise Zone folks and our Vistas are here, young men and women who are volunteering their time as part of this program to really lift up the Promise Zone in North Minneapolis, and so we would be welcome to come back and explore and have a meeting on Promise Zone.
Thank you. One last comment from Councilmember Goodman.
I just really feel like they should have a few minutes they're here, and I'm willing to take time out of IT. A very interesting topic. Sorry, Beth. I just feel like they're here, and it's such an important topic, and I was one of the people that dragged it out. So I just feel, can you just give them like 5 minutes? They're here. They sat through all of this. And we care a lot about it. Am I seeing nodding heads up here that they want to prioritize the Promise Zone? All right, then. We'll have 5 minutes, and we'll need to end this part at no later than 2:40.
Excellent. Chair Palmisano and council members, I'll try to be quick. The Promise Zone is a designation. It did not come with grant dollars. It did not come with funding attached to it. And it came with a 10-year horizon. And one of the reasons it came with a 10-year horizon was because shifting how communities work is a tough lift. It's a heavy lift. We unfortunately, in that 10-year horizon, met up with a federal administration change. And as that change has happened and the existing president and the federal administration has occurred, we have seen a decline in investment and in grant dollars come through the city. But that does not mean that there are no dollars coming, and we just have to continue to be creative as we move forward, or to think about those opportunities that bring forth some dollars. I'll also say that the Promise Zone, and I think I mentioned Julie Learson, who heads that group, and she's got some great vistas along with her, and they've done some extraordinary data analysis in the past year. It really has, as a data geek myself, I'll tell you that I'm blown away by the level of analysis they've been able to achieve last year with some of their analysis, whether it was a vulnerability index in North Minneapolis, or whether it was about how much federal dollars are spent in federal agencies, and both of those we can bring forward in a subsequent meeting. But they've really been thoughtful about, if we've got a finite amount of resources here, how do we start layering? How do we be smarter? And what they're focused on, which is part of our previous conversation around the arts, is about economic development. They have an economic development working group that really has been laser focused on what are those creative opportunities. And I know, and some of you know, and I know they know, that sometimes those ideas are outside the box. They're creative, they're wild. Some of them won't be there. Some of them are pie in the sky, but some of them are really about, let's get us thinking about economic development differently. So whether it's now this, and whether we can start layering cultural districts or opportunity zones, or what does that look like? The Promise Zone, to me, the essence of it is saying, we believe that we're going to do something different in North Minneapolis. This is the point we're going to spend our resources. And the data already tells us that we have a Promise Zone for a reason. There is poverty, there is disinvestment, and there is lack of engagement there. We as a city believed in the Promise Zone because that's where we're going to put our efforts. And that is what we're going to continue to drive this year with our community partners and with our enterprise partners, who really have to step up as well and say, we're going to choose to do something differently here. So Promise Zone is extraordinary as they convene people out in community and bring forward things like, how do we do, and some of them are public safety issues, some of them are economic development issues, but they're all tied in their commitment to make that area of North Minneapolis a better place for all.
Thank you.
I think I got my 5 minutes.
I'll invite Councilmember Cunningham if you wanted to make any comments.
Yes, this is shout out to Promise Zone. Thank you for all your hard work. This is a higher level comment about the results process that I just wanted to talk about, much the same as Councilmember Goodman. I've talked about this a lot in private, want to put it also out there for public discussion as well, is that we are measuring a lot of times outputs versus outcomes, and those are different. So that is a concern that I have because we're counting, for example, using the Promise Zone as an example, which does amazing work, where like the goals and purpose of it is to stabilize housing, to increase economic development, to improve community police relations. Is that right? Those three? And so like what are those outcomes and how are we supporting them and actually measuring? Because that includes multiple other departments. So how are we actually measuring progress in that? And I think that we as a council really have to be thinking and taking into consideration how are we supporting and building the capacity of the departments across the board with data and evaluation with outcome specifics? One of the things that I have consistently heard from people is, well, outcomes are kind of hard to measure and it's kind of nebulous, and it's like, no, it's not. If we're talking about economic development, we need to define what economic development means in the context and then measure that. And so, but instead what we're kind of doing right now is we're doing a lot of measuring of widgets. So it's like how many trainings were there, how many was this, how many was that, which is great, but is that actually producing the outcomes that we want to see? So with with something like sustainability, it's a little bit easier because it's like if we're reducing the emissions, like we know that there are positive outcomes that come from that. But when we think about like housing stability, if we're just counting the amount of houses that we're building, that is not necessarily telling us whether or not we're stabilizing housing. If we are just counting the amount of housing inspections, that doesn't mean that we are improving the quality of the housing stock. And so we need to be clear about what the outcomes are and how we're going to measure that. Because right now, the current setup, and I know that we don't want to change results for the millionth time, but it's like the way we have it set up is very siloed. So the health department is doing their thing, the coordinator's office does their thing, public works, so everybody is working in silos. However, there's so much overlap. So if we're talking about increasing safety in communities, that's the health department and the police department and the city attorney's office. So how are we working together and leveraging results as a way for us to be able to measure actual outcomes that are impacting people? We haven't really defined those, and we haven't supported folks in being able to measure them and report that back out in a certain way. So we can talk about that with like artists and the creative economy. Like there's so many different ways that we can actually be measuring outcomes for that. And so I just wanted to bring that to the public conversation. The federal government through the Obama administration created a commission on for evidence-based policymaking, and I think that is something that we should maybe consider here as a way to be able to support the results process and be able to support the departments in doing so as well. So I'll get off my soapbox with measurements and outcomes, but I think it's really important because nobody has logic models for the work that they do, and so there just is a lot of blurriness. So thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me that space.
Thank you. It seems the last word will be had by Councilmember Gordon.
Hear, hear.
Chair Palmazzano, if I may, I just say that is precisely one of the reasons why I support a biannual budget. That it allows us time to really think about what those evaluations are. We don't often have time to think about it. As our office matures and starts to think about measuring in very, very different ways, I'd say that we also have some areas, we didn't do them because last year we did study sessions, but city goal results are another area where we break the silos and we bring different departments together to talk about it. But having time to think and build in evaluation, I think is critical for us to move forward so that we have the time to think about what the impact, what the outcome is in community. Because if we don't answer that question, I'm not quite sure why we're doing the work that we're doing.
Thank you. The outcomes instead of the outputs and better opportunities for interdepartmental work. I think we've done a really good job with the study sessions, I have to say, and express my appreciation for that. But that is one of my own drivers for the biennial budget transition. So I will say to that, hear, hear.
So I thought I had the last word, and then the coordinator jumped in. I absolutely agree that we need measurable outcomes, and it made me think of when we used to have our 24 sustainability indicators that actually were about what are the impacts our work's having of the stuff we really care about. And maybe now that we have our vision and our mission and some of our goals, we can align it with that, because it just isn't about the measurables, about how many people we had contact with or anything like that. We want to know that our people are healthy, are successful, and get to those things. And I appreciate the work of the Promise Zone, but the measures that we do look at now, it's grant funding and, I forgot the second one, but, and that's important stuff too, but I absolutely agree we need to, for us to really know if we're being successful, we need to measure outcomes that are meaningful and important to us and to people. And I'll just note that we proved for years and years and decades that you don't have to have a 2-year budget in order to do that. We can do that again whenever we want to take the time and care enough to do it, and we don't have to get all lost in the details.
I'm going to transition now to the health department. As we do, I wanted to point out 2 people I failed to mention before. Brian Smith, I mind blanked on your last name. Thank you for all of your help on the results stuff, as well as Jonathan Williams Kinsel, who's also in the audience. As we transition from City Coordinator's office to the Health Department, I want to reiterate my gratitude to my colleagues here for your participation today. You know, we do promise to end on time, but this is a deeper conversation about what the city does in the context of budgeting, and I think it's really valuable to have it on April 25th instead of December 5th as we're finalizing a budget proposal. So the mayor needed to be out of town for city business today after we had set this all up with all of you. So we are having it without him, but the mayor's office is listening. They're here in the audience as much as they can be today. I know that he and his staff are paying close attention to this work too. So with that, Director Musicant, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to represent our work before you as part of this results presentation. But I am just a representative. It is really the work of my entire department that characterizes or moves us in the direction of these results. I'm going to just fly past these red, yellow, and green, although it's a good shorthand way for you to look at things you want to highlight maybe as I speak if I don't highlight them myself. So the first slide talks about workforce diversity, and in the area of people of color, we are kind of floating along at about the same level. We have made some changes that I hope will start to be reflected in our outcomes. Certainly the pool of candidates is sometimes a limiting factor for us, but we are also trying to restructure our positions internally to allow more flexibility, to be able to bring in more people at an entry-level position and move them up through training and promotional opportunities. And we always have an eye towards trying to reflect the people we serve with the people we have serving them. So we will continue to work on that. We have a long history of hiring many women in the department. When the environmental health folks joined us a few years ago, that did bring us a little bit closer to equity with the population, but we still have a lot of women who work in our department. Spending with diverse suppliers. That spending, as you heard in the previous presentation, is for-profit spending, and so it's predominantly food we purchase, some of our green business, and Lead and Healthy Homes contracts. And you'll note that for the Department of Health, that's about $2 million. We did this next slide just to bring to your attention that we spend almost $10 million in nonprofit organizations. So the question that came up previously by Councilmember Cunningham about how can we look at how we're spending those kinds of dollars as well is an especially important question for the health department. So the first activity area is family and early childhood. This is an area where we have been working diligently over the last few years to braid as much money towards the same goal as possible. And so that those columns you see, those multicolored columns, really reflect all this different funding from the state, from the national, from competitive grants, all woven together so that we can be providing more home visiting for young starting families in our community. And even as we braid those dollars, and we have been able to grow that amount, we are not close to meeting the need. If you look at the number of families that are starting out with children born into poverty, we're still probably reaching only 15 to 20% of those families with this intensive home visiting that meets families before the child is born and then keeps a relationship with them well into the second year of life. One important program, Healthy Start, which we had for 15 years, we were not refunded with that position, and so that green bar won't be there next year. But as you can see, the individuals that we are serving has grown to some degree. The next area is core public health infrastructure, and so this is really the underpinnings that allow us to do all the programmatic work. It's having leadership, it's doing community health assessments, it's doing policy work, it's having a diverse staff. It's also, in our case, raising funds, competitive grant funds. And so you'll see that we have continued steady and increased grant funding coming in to support our programs. You'll also see in that second chart that some of our work is more grant dependent than others. And this is somewhat of a concern when those areas are fairly foundational. In emergency preparedness, we really are concerned about the fact that it's mostly federal funding. And so we know that emergencies come and we want to be ready for them. And so if the federal government loses interest in funding local governments, that's going to be a problem for us. Another area that's heavily grant dependent is our healthy living work. And so that's another area of concern. There is a sort of a growing conceptualization, if you will, nationally and at the state level about foundational capabilities and beginning to say, what should local health departments have? What should they have as underpinnings both in this infrastructure and then as at least minimal investment in some of the key program areas? So as those become more fleshed out at the state level, I can bring them to the Peace Committee and we can talk about what is that structure and how does that line up with the kind of funding that we've been able to work with in the past and going forward. The next area is food, lodging, and pools, which we do through delegation agreements with the Department of Health and the Department of Agriculture, both at the state level. And the bar graph that you see there has a couple things going on, so I'll try and describe what they are. Our routine inspections, and these are inspections that we do on a schedule. They're not inspections because of a disease outbreak or because someone did poorly and we need to go back and visit them. So these are our routine inspections, and this really shows you the growth in the places that need to be inspected. We just have growing industry, a growing restaurant industry and a hotel industry. And then at the same time, you see this red line, which actually, if we went back to 2012, would be much higher. And we've had a real decrease in the citations that we've issued. And that's because we have really changed our approaches. Probably in large part when the environmental health folks came to the health department and we reminded ourselves that we have more than one tool. When you have a hammer, everything's a nail. But when it's not a nail and you need a screwdriver or something else, it's nice to have that tool as well. And so we are really using a lot more education and coaching. And so you'll see in the second multicolored bar that we are reaching out and connecting with restaurants and other operators that are having a hard time meeting the criteria that we expect them to meet in order to have a safe environment, and providing them with culturally specific, linguistically specific training so that they can learn better how to do the job that we expect of them. And we have seen a 25% reduction in food safety violations for those participating in that program. So working with people instead of just penalizing people really is a productive way to support our businesses and to also keep us all safe. So the next area is a school-based clinic program. And the first graphic there is the number of clients seen for mental health by school year. And we really took a quality assurance approach and tried to figure out how to make sure that we're integrating this mental health assessment component anytime we see one of the young people in the high schools where we operate these clinics. There was a slight decrease between the school year 16-17 and the school year of 17-18. I think we can regard that as essentially flat, although it was given a red in the red, yellow, and green indicator. We had 3 new staff. There were some new grants. There were some changes in data collection. We feel that we're on the upward trajectory as we look into the next year that will be reported on. STI tests conducted by calendar year is another area that we've really worked on, both increasing the numbers and making sure that we are testing young men as much as we are testing young women, and we feel we are succeeding in both of those measures. Environmental services is the next area, and again we have some complex graphics to talk about. So the blue bars in the graphic called pollution control registration and permits, you'll see a general growth in permits that we are issuing. And we expect that in 2020 there will be, because of some ordinance changes, where we will be looking at doing permits for garages and accessory dwelling units, that those permits will continue to go up. The red line, the pollution control registration, has come down for a couple reasons. One is there was a policy change for the largest dip between 16 and 17, where we changed some of the categories of what we were including. And so that was an expected decrease. But the continued decrease is potentially because we just aren't keeping up with what's out there. And so we may be coming forward with some requests to have some additional administrative support so that we're sure that we are touching everybody that we should with that PCAR assessment. The second area, pollution reduction. So this is more of an outcomes measure, if you will. We, through our green business work, the installation of solar energy and some of the other measures we're doing to reduce carbon, are really able to show an exponential growth. And I had to remind myself, how do you define a line that curves up as opposed to just a straight line that's going up in a good direction? So the straight line that's going up in a good direction is linear, but one that's curving up is exponential, and that is a sign of accelerating change. And that, I think, is really important in this time of global warming, that we have accelerating change. We've learned, we had pilots, we learned, and now we are taking off, if you will. The next slide is youth development and sexual health. And so part of the work that we've done, reflecting really through the eyes of our school-based clinics, is they saw kids coming into high school from middle school really poorly educated about sexuality. And there is no requirement at the state level that there is comprehensive sex ed. In fact, I think it is in a bill this year in probably the House. I'm not sure that it'll make it into law. But we worked with the school district to identify a curriculum that they thought they could incorporate into middle schools. And so we have been working with them to get the curriculum purchased, to get the teachers trained, to get teachers identified. Sometimes there is no health teacher in middle school, and so it's finding someone else to teach. And so the fact that we have essentially consistency across several years is just a great sign of success. It's hard to keep things going in another organization when all you have is advice and a little bit of support to give. The Healthy Living Initiative is next, and what we're representing here is really just a couple activities. There's 23 strategies that have been implemented. The first one looks at the work we've done with the Public Housing Authority buildings and really the proportion of residents who have been impacted by the work we have done inside those buildings. And so you'll see a growth in the number of buildings and a subsequent growth in the number of residents who have been influenced by opportunities to have better access to activity, healthy food, and smoke-free environments. The second graph is a little bit complex, and another one of the areas where we were given a red indicator. But I'd like to point out to you a change that's occurring within the graph. I think the first thing that people see is how much 100% compliance is there, and that is not a positive indicator. But if you look at the green, which is the number of retail outlets that are between 60 and 90% compliant, we are growing that area. And so we find promise in that. Secondly, we have worked with you and we have changed the ordinance in the last year so that it's easier. There are less rigid guidelines and it's more reflective of cultural diversity and interest in food. And we also plan to increase our enforcement this summer so that retailers understand that this is something that we are taking seriously. Youth violence prevention, we chose to focus our indicators for you on the group violence intervention program. The first graphic you'll see there is shooting and homicide incidents, and I would like to draw your attention to the orange-red line, which is the GMI non-fatal shootings. And so what we're trying to look at there is those individuals that were identified as, let's see, what is GMI exactly? Group member involved, that were group member involved shootings and therefore were likely to be impacted by the group violence intervention program. So if we see a diminishment in that line, which we do, we see much less group member involved shootings than if we look at non-group violent, let's see, non-GMI, non-fatal shootings. And those, the green line has gone up and exceeds the orange line. So we feel that that is a true sign of success, but I'm sure that that was a complicated way to describe that. So if anyone has questions, I'd be happy to answer that. And then the second graphic there is about our outcomes overall, and yet you'll see that between 2018 and 17, we have grown the number of folks who are served and the individuals that are joining the program. The next slide is lead poisoning and healthy homes. And this is, the bars represent preventative visits. So many of the visits that we do into homes for asthma and lead are because there is a health problem that's been identified in a child usually. And so if a young person is identified with an elevated lead level, we'll go in and probably it'll take 10 visits before we get everything rectified and fixed and changed. That is not what's represented in these graphics. These graphics are preventive visits. These are something we want to do more of. We We want to move from using children as our canaries in the coal mine to tell us, oh, there's a problem here. We want to go and find the problems and fix them before children are poisoned. And so you'll see the blue line is the children who've been identified with elevated lead levels. And those numbers are coming down just as our preventive visits are going up. And we want to see more of that.
If I may, Director Music, Councilmember Cunningham?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually want to go back to the GVI slide.
Yes.
And so, first, I just want to say that this is really remarkable work and that it really speaks to the model of working across, again, jurisdictions and partnerships and departments, because it is a partnership with social service agencies, with MPD, as well as folks on the ground who are from community doing the work, under the leadership of both Ferone Brown and also Sasha Cotton. So I just want to give a shout out to the folks doing amazing work in this. Do you know when the next call-in is?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, I know it's being planned.
It's still in
May
cool.
18th.
Okay.
There we go. Shout out from the audience.
Thank you, audience.
Yeah.
So, I also just want to point out, really highlight, if you look at the chart between 2017 and 2018, the outcomes, those are really amazing outcomes. The fact that we did not see any of the clients that, we didn't see any clients pass away last year. That's a really big deal. The fact that we saw less probation violations is a really big deal. Even with all of that, there were more people served. And so what this really speaks to is that this works. And I can speak to my ward that we saw huge drops in violent crime overall in Falwell, which is one of the top neighborhoods that have issues with violent crime. Violent crime fell by 26% last year. Jordan neighborhood, it fell by 41% last year. So there are really big impacts that are happening. And so I just want to say thank you to my colleagues for investing in this program with last year's budget. I think that what is necessary is we really take the time to take in these results, because this is hard work. Folks are up at 3 a.m. talking young folks, most of the time young folks, but also folks in their late 20s off the ledge from hurting somebody, hurting themselves, or whatever the case may be. We can appreciate the numbers, but I also want to appreciate the humans behind the numbers who have put in so much time and energy and do it. Really, they should be paid in their weight in gold, but we are a municipal government and cannot do such things, so just want to make sure that we at least spread our gratitude for the work that everybody does. So thank you, Commissioner, for giving me the time to be able to
Yes,
highlight
thank
that.
you for amplifying that very important work. And I agree. I believe the people who are helping us in the community are such rare gems that we are lucky to be connected with them.
Thank you. Council President Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also just wanted to briefly comment on this and say a couple things. First, I think that the new investments that we made last term were some of the most powerful changes that the council made last term. And I'm really excited that this term we've been able to create a pathway to more sustainability. So I wanted to thank you and staff, but also Councilmembers Cunningham and Fletcher, who really helped lead during our budget process, just making sure that we have this sustained over time and that we're empowering our staff to bring us recommendations that are based on evidence. I also wanted to comment that, as we've started to create that sustainability, I think there's some questions about where should this be situated within the city enterprise, and it is a multidisciplinary approach. And so I do think that the health department skill at using evidence-based strategies has been helpful in making the case for this work, and is part of why it has been successful, is because we were able to take strategies from other cities that had an evidence of success to them. And as Councilmember Cunningham pointed out, the anecdotal stories and things that we hear about people who are being served are powerful, but the trends and the evidence that we're seeing is important to make the case for this in the long term. So those are just two comments I wanted to make about this work.
Thank you. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. I'll echo everybody's praise for the GVI work, but I actually want to pull us back to the environmental services slide a couple back for a second.
We're going backwards, right?
Yep. I just want to make sure I understand what.
Because these are ordered
There you go.
by monetary amounts, it's hard for me to remember where they are. Okay, yes, I'm there.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that I understand what we're measuring, because I do appreciate that this is an outcome that that we're measuring something that's actually happening in the environment as a result of this work. But I want to make sure that I understand what it is. So because I think we experience pollution in two different ways, right? There's one that we're cumulatively sort of putting CO2 and other greenhouse gases into the environment and causing climate change, but then there's the very specific, we're putting pollution into the air in our neighborhoods in ways that people are experiencing in a very hyper-local level. And so are we measuring CO2 reduction generally, even if that's, CO2 reduction from a coal plant nowhere near Minneapolis that's providing power to us, or are we measuring a reduction of pollution actually in the air that Minneapolis residents are breathing?
Well, certainly, Madam Chair, Councilmember Fletcher, certainly the blue line, the blue bars in that pollution reduction are actual pollution that's not occurring in town here. And those are from our green business programs. And so what we work with retired engineers and others to help us calculate exactly how many pounds of stuff isn't going to go in the air anymore because of changes in a auto body shop or a dry cleaner. And so those are local. The carbon, I believe, is our contribution to the carbon that comes from generating electricity and other such things. Yes. Mm-hmm. All right. Shall I move forward? I think I was on... I did lead poisoning. All right, emergency preparedness and infectious disease. So the indicators here are about our emergency preparedness work, and the first one has to do with the amount of training we do and the average staff that are showing up at trainings. Training is really important, and practicing is really important for us because, unlike we are considered first responders in public health, and yet we are not like the police department or the fire department. We don't get to practice responding in our normal business, and so we need to intentionally practice responding. So that's very important. And yet we have had many opportunities to actually respond because things do happen here in Minneapolis. And so the second graph shows that the cost of responding exceeds the kind of funding we have. The funding we have really is about planning and getting ready for things and not doing things. So when we respond, it comes out of redirecting staff time and resources, and sometimes that's a little bit easier to do if they're general fund supported, but even then it's an opportunity cost of some other work not getting done. Other staff that are grant funded, it's harder to redirect their time easily to responding. And so this is a challenge that we face, and I have ideas at the state level. They think about creating an emergency response fund, maybe just for the health department, but maybe for the city as a whole, so that we have something to go to when unexpected things happen. We certainly know that because of climate change and other things that make our world more volatile these days, that it's not less likely that we will have to be responding to unexpected things. And so that's something you might want to think about for the city to set aside some funds for unexpected expenditures. That completes my slides. I know that I was given a memo with some other questions. Do you
There
want to
but
raise
first-
them? Or?
Yeah, first
Okay.
there are some others from
Okay.
members up here on the dais. Councilmember Ellison?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Didn't have so much a question. I think my colleagues covered all the questions and praise. I did just want to point out that with regards to GBI, we do have one of the GBI members here today, and I think that while I'm sure Manu would rather not be highlighted as a humble guy, I think the work is so important, and the work that you guys do in the health department, and this isn't exclusive to the health department, but it's life-saving work. But saving a life in an environmental sense can be a little bit obscure, whereas I think with GBI, it is direct life-saving work. And the fact that it's recognized as a health issue, and the fact that we are sort of putting a larger investment in it, and the fact that we have members of our GBI team here to come and sit in on the results meeting, I think is a big deal, and I just wanted to prop it up and thank the whole team, but also thank Manu specifically. So that's it.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Cunningham, you wanted to maybe go through the things that we highlighted that we would do a couple deeper questions in the health analysis?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. So we had talked about for the focus areas being around routine inspections and citations, and there were some questions there. And then also we had talked about violence prevention. So the Madam Chair, how would you like just for us to go through the questions? Okay. So just to be able to take some time to really flesh out those particular areas, can you answer the questions around what has the health department done to drive increased routine inspections and fewer citations? And is it a good thing that the health department is issuing fewer citations?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, I tried to address a little bit of that when I went through the slide. Yes, we believe it is a good thing to have fewer citations because that is sort of a last resort when things aren't going well and people aren't responding. So really we've taken a much broader approach to trying to get the outcomes that we want to see. And as I mentioned, our intensive coaching that we offer to some of our most challenged organizations has really resulted in a 25% decrease in their violations. We pair staff with linguistic skills with some of the workers in the restaurants so that we're sure that everyone understands. We convene businesses by cultural group again so that they have a chance to understand how the city works. When we approach some new ordinance like Green to Go, we work with businesses to connect them with vendors. So we're using a number of approaches that we believe help people follow the rules that the city has set out.
Do you all by chance track the money that is saved from the decrease of violations? Just kind of like a return on investment in terms of people not getting sick or whatever the case may be. I'm just curious as to if there's an ROI that's tracked for that.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, I don't know that I have on my fingertips that information. If we have it, we will share it. It also brings to mind we had a recent meeting with someone from the State Office of Management and Budget who's interested in working with some local health departments to look at return on investment with some of the programs. And so we did just have that conversation earlier this week, and we'll be one of several local health departments in the state that participate, and so we'll be happy to bring all that back to you when we have that as well.
Great, thank you. I think it's sometimes something that can be really overlooked when it comes to, again, outcomes. There's actually quite a bit of money that's being saved by the proactive piece of the work. It's like sometimes we're like, well, the citations are going down, so we're losing that money, but we're actually, in being proactive and preventative, being able actually to save a lot of money in a lot of other ways. So just wanted to be able to highlight that. And we talked a little bit about the violence prevention piece, but we're in the process right now thinking about how do we scale this, right? It's working so well in a particular area, so it's really working in North Minneapolis, but what can we do as the council? What can the health department do to be able to accelerate the work that's happening, as well as what are some of the best practices that have been learned that can be leveraged as we continue to develop the Office of Violence Prevention?
Yes, I think, Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, I think that the new office and the way it's designed is really going to allow us to look with more intentionality across the enterprise and think about the resources that are being invested in prevention across the enterprise and try and leverage the impact of those. We know that ongoing community engagement is essential to this work, and so continuing to invest in that and to take the time to build those same intensive relationships as we expand into some of the communities in South Minneapolis will be really important. And then we also know that the community capacity is what will keep things going. And so as we can do our work so that we are helping to build ongoing community capacity to keep things in balance, that we will have a safer community as well.
Yes, community ownership is just so important from both like a literal sense of owning things, but then also the agency and ownership over process, I think is really important. One of the things that I really love about the work that is being done is while the city has the infrastructure and helps fund it, ultimately it's folks from the community and of the community that are implementing the programs, who are the folks sitting next to the bedsides, who are the folks who are showing up at people's houses at 3 a.m. to talk them off the ledge. And there's a real sense of ownership in that, and so I appreciate you saying that around that piece, because it's really important, and I look forward to it being infused in all that we do with the Office of Violence Prevention. And those are all that I have here, Madam Chair, so I'll pass it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I put myself in queue for something you said at the very beginning, which was about grant funding and how so much of what you do in your department has a reliance on grant funding. So I was curious, how do you as a department head make a determination about when to apply for grant funds and how to reprioritize money within your department if or when a grant runs out?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have, for some time, tried to, while acknowledging the importance of grants, not to chase grants. We really want to be working with intentionality about the direction that we believe we need to go and find funding opportunities that go with that. You can run all over the place for little bits of money and kind of lose your focus. And so we have worked hard not to do that, but to have our plan and find funding that matches that and hopefully be successful. Your second part of your question is a challenge. What do we do if more funding doesn't come? I think in some cases we can look at grant funding as an opportunity to start something and learn about it and bring forward those ideas, and perhaps they're worth keeping as part of the ongoing enterprise. I also noted in this question, as it was written down, if I might read it, what plans exist for grant-supported FTEs supporting vital programs such upon expiration of the grants? If the plan of absorbing those FTEs into the general fund in future years, are they included in the general fund 5-year direction for out years? I've never had that invitation. I would love to have that invitation to think in that particular way. But as I mentioned, I think it was during the infrastructure slide, this work that's being done at the state and national level about foundational capabilities, I think could give us a way to think together about that and whether or not we have as a department a sufficient base, and then we can build grant funding based on, emerging needs or opportunities, or if some of our fundamental stuff is grant funded and at risk. And so we will be looking at that as we have that guidance from the state.
Thank you. I appreciate that, because sometimes the work that we get grants for can be temporary, right? It
Yes.
can establish a blueprint that the city can pick up on and address then in other ways. And sometimes it really can be foundational, or the work that they start to do is showing promise, is showing success, and it would be really detrimental to the people we're trying to help to then stop it when funding runs out. So
Yes.
Does anybody else have specific questions? Council President Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't think this has been covered. I had to step out for a second. But I wondered if you could comment a bit about the health department's role in responding to the encampment last summer and the navigation center, and just how, either now or maybe going forward, as we think about the city's role in responding, how we can draw on our expertise, but also make sure that we're resourced correctly to respond in a way that's, strategic and sustainable as much as we can to things that are also kind of in this category of a little bit of emergency. They're ongoing problems that then have kind of flashed up as potential health emergencies.
Mm-hmm. Madam Chair, Council President Bender, when the encampment began to grow, we were informed by that local phenomenon because of what we'd heard also in what was going on across the country in other areas. And so it was the issues and problems and challenges that had occurred in those other communities that caused us to perceive the growing encampment as something that we needed to think about from a public health perspective. And so I think it is valuable for us to continue to be connected across the country as we are, so that we can have that additional measure of looking at what's going on here and think about what could be and what we want to try and avoid. So our approach was initially, anyway, really to protect the health of those folks who were there from hepatitis A, using various, which had been the outbreaks across the country, using various strategies, including hygiene support and then offering vaccines. And our hope would be that as we think about that situation and potential ones going forward, that we use even a broader array of strategies, that we think about spacing and how many people are living together in a small space, and what tools do we have as a city to help create those environments that are at least not quite as threatening for health. As I mentioned when I did the last slide, the contingency fund, I think, is also something we might want to think about. It's the kind of thing that you might not tap into in a given year. So it's not like something that needs to be funded annually as much as something that would be helpful and reassuring, at least in those first steps of responding to an emergency. So I guess those are my initial thoughts.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions or comments about your results meeting. Thank you for this presentation. I want to let my colleagues know that it is my full intent to make sure that departments feel like they have their opportunity to give all of their results data. For that reason, I asked HR and IT if they would be willing to be moved to a future time. So we're going to see that later when we have time to honor those conversations as well. So thank you all for joining us today. We're going to end on time. With no further business before us, I'm going to move to receive and file the Coordinator's Office and Health Department's results items. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries, and our business is complete for today. Thank you.